Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second edition of Reimagine 2020. I'm your host today. Glad to have all of you join us out there visiting Reimagine. And if you missed our last conference back in May, feel free to visit the ri2020.io website. You can also catch full interviews, about 80 plus interviews at our YouTube channel at Reimagine 2020. So go ahead and subscribe there. I'm excited today. I have a colleague of mine in the space that's been experienced for quite some time. Very fortunate to have him. Let me go ahead and without further ado, introduce you. How you doing, Florian? How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good to see you. Yeah, doing fantastic. Great to be joining you in the team.
Yeah, I think we'll be sharing a lot of insights and perspectives. As I mentioned before, Reimagine was really designed for our university partners, our students, our global audience. During these unprecedented times, everybody's at home, and what can we do to contribute and add value to this ecosystem? And one of those ways is to bring in industry leaders, thought leaders like yourself, through video and interviews to share your perspectives and insights. So
That's great.
Let's go ahead and kick this off. And first, tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey. I want to touch on that. We'll kind of get into blockchain, and you were ingrained in this healthcare space for a little bit, and now you're with your new team, which is actually an AI and not integrating blockchain yet, but down the road on the roadmap, it seems like there's some opportunities there to implement blockchain. So yeah, give us a quick, but give us your background, your bio and your journey up until blockchain.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And you're right. Ultimately, we'll talk a little bit about that integration between AI and blockchain. So my journey started about, I want to say 15 odd years ago as a software engineer, more so on the back end side of large corporations. I worked in investment banking for a little bit before I ultimately joined a consulting firm. And for about 12 years, I've done a mix of work that was doing architecture of large enterprise ecosystems, a lot of what we call today digital transformation, refactoring, legacy system, trying to adopt new and emerging technologies to help them change the way they operate. For that consultancy, I also built their product business, so bringing in the consultancy, the expertise in software engineering, and packaging everything together to serve clients. And by the end of it, around 2015, we opened up our healthcare advisory specifically around blockchain and started to work more so in an R&D fashion and fast prototyping in discovering healthcare or blockchain for healthcare, and then started to find proof of concept and ways to grow in the adoption. Didn't really take, as you can imagine, 2016 is the early stage. More so we're talking about Bitcoin at that stage, right? So we thought about blockchain as a currency more than anything else. But the hitch was on how can we maybe use some of the same decentralized principles and the trustless aspect that was really putting the industry upside down to exchanging data, creating value, improving care, so on and so forth. And that has taken like wildfire, maybe a wrong term to use right now, but if it's taken on to the industry, and eventually left the consultancy where I was in late 2017, joined a information broker, health information broker in the US that carries about 160, 180 million medical record per year. And the challenge we faced at the time was, well, how can we maybe use different kind of technologies to streamline the exchange of information, create value out of that health information, serve care providers, serve patients, and eventually streamline all the way that the industry operates, which was a very big deal and a very front and center to the conversation in the industry in itself. And I joined my current company focused on AI, on the AI side, how to use the data with AI models, productive models that help steer patients through the ecosystem just about a year ago. So that's me in a short wave.
Nice. No, I think, this whole healthcare thing and kind of your journey, everybody's gone down the rabbit hole. When did you say you came across Bitcoin again or blockchain? What year was that?
That was really in the early stage, around 2016, I want to say. Well, early stage when it started to pick up more on the public stage, I want to say, right?
Yeah.
So,
nice. And it's kind of interesting. So we have a lot of students right now and younger viewers ranging from beginners to novice to experts. But blockchain is the components of blockchain. Blockchain is, the buzzword of the structure of it, but really it's been a buildup of various distributed systems and cryptography over a period of time, right? And I've heard go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you see the work, it's far longer than that. When you go back into some of what the guys were doing in the early stage, and small groups getting together and thinking semi-anarchic mindset of like, how can we flip things upside down and approach those problems differently? Yeah, we're building on their shoulders right now, which is really satisfying. But yeah, it's even more than a decade for those guys for sure, big time.
Yeah, exactly. And so we've come to this point, and we've had some other discussions, and I've had some conversations with specifically people in the healthcare space, and I know you're not in it now, but I would like to shed some light on how blockchain, this whole conference, we've been talking to various leaders in the crypto space, in the regulation space, and this all has to do with blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology. So we're talking to DeFi projects, we're talking to regulators, we're talking to the Fortune 100 companies of the world. Everybody has their own, let's just call it, use case. And although, as we just discussed, it's been around a long time, we're still trying to figure it out, right? And I think the bigger picture, which we'll get into your project later, is that blockchain touches AI, ML, IoT, right? It's kind of this underlying factor. But for the healthcare, industry, and I've talked to a few people, it seems like a perfect fit. So I kind of want to touch on how it makes sense. But where I really want to shed light is that you have some inside knowledge in the sense of the barrier still to adopting it. Although it makes sense, the technology may be there. I've seen all of these startup projects tackling, from an app to adapt, tackling these issues. But you see the other problems to it, and that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit. So let's go back and why I've heard a few people say like blockchain and healthcare just go hand in hand. It's like the only one use case. But yeah, shed some light on why, first of all, the problems, and then how blockchain can and will help.
Well, and if I were to grossly summarize the problems we have in healthcare, and we have unique problems in the US, but they apply across the board, right? So, but if I were to grossly summarize, there's really two main problems when you step back. First, it's trying to improve care delivery to patients. How do we make, shorten the time you spend in a hospital? How to make sure that someone receives the care they need even before you've got some of the symptoms, right? And we can treat the root cause faster, and make sure that what we call the care team, their family, their caregivers, the providers, the specialists are all aware of what the patient needs to receive and help them. So that's really about improving care. The other aspect would be around reducing costs, right? How do we make access to specific services cheaper? How do we make sure that we don't do duplicative work, right? Twice the X-ray because you went from one hospital to another and you have to duplicate the effort. And when you kind of step back at it, look at it and consider those two problems, a lot of what we find, it's a lot about a problem of transferability of information. And there's a massive lack of trust within the ecosystem where doctors don't trust the other ones because maybe they have not diagnosed correctly, or maybe legally they need to redo all the panel tests because their diagnosis have to be found on or based on everything they see, because they cannot necessarily trust 100% what the other doctors have done, right? There's also just the lack of ability to transfer data. You go from a hospital to another and they don't have systems that talk to one another. And then when it comes to the payment, you don't get enough of the information, so on and so forth. And so very quickly you see that what unravels around you is that the lack of transferability of the data, the inability to constantly have certainty that you can base your diagnosis or your judgment on data that is validated in one way, shape, or form that you could trust without having to trust who's been providing it, was really the foundation. And so when, the whole concept of decentralized trustless approach came, I'm like, well, hold on, those terms, without even understanding any of the concepts that the teams have put together through blockchain in itself, just the terms themselves, they resonate. They make sense with the problems we've been facing. We keep on asking for it without finding a way to implement it.
Yeah.
And so we started to ask, well, could then blockchain be that part of the answer? And slowly but surely, we start being able to, check the boxes and say, okay, I would be able to get people that I've never seen before to agree on top of information that they're going to start sharing. And they're going to agree that if we find that protocol, we can then start relying on that data. But they've never met before. They never had to, they showed some of their credentials and whatnot, but it doesn't need for all of us to be at the same place. It doesn't need for us to be centralized. All of this evaporates. And very quickly, we then started to say, well, we need to adopt that. We need to start looking into it very seriously and start finding a way to integrate with then the big systems. So that was really, from my perspective, the genesis and what really launched a lot of those conversations.
And would you say a lot of the interest to share this information, it's all siloed info. So is it very siloed? I know that the system has been obviously around for decades, right? When does the industry, it seems like they want to, now the next question is, how do we do it? And then I've seen all of these projects in like startups in specifically like in healthcare and these apps and trying to streamline that. A lot of the success of projects, it's a little bit of luck, it's a little bit of timing, it all has to snowball together, right, with regulation and we're kind of seeing this on the cryptocurrency side with like financial services and inflation, and it's kind of all has a backdrop to provide support for this advancement in crypto. Now on the healthcare side, where are we in terms of potentially, I don't know, the regulation side or the state side, the compliance side? Obviously, technology is much quicker than the legal aspects of putting these things in, into law. Are we getting close to kind of, bringing all this info and advancing the tech and implementing it in healthcare with the people that are a little bit, older generation? You got to go back to the law books and stuff. Where's kind of the gap there? Is it wide or narrow?
Yeah, I like the way you describe it, a bit of a tidal wave where, we make an effort, it takes us that far. Yeah, we have to step back a little bit, but the wave is going to come back with the learnings. I really like your analogy, the way you're going at it. And, I think a great representation that we have right now is you have agencies and entities that are governed by the government, such as the FDA, NIH, and other very serious groups that are the ones asking for help on understanding the use cases, validating where they can go. And that's been a tremendous collaboration between private organizations and governments, the governmental bodies they all recognize that, we can't use everything at once, but what can we start using? So I think part of the complexity is when you talk about, guys like the FDA, for example, it is hard to say that you're going to be able and blanketly approve the use of a technology that is going to enable a startup to directly deliver recommendation for care to a patient. It's, the purpose of the FDA is not necessarily, we feel that sometimes their purpose is to slow down, but it's not. It's to actually make sure there's an approach to bringing, safely new products, and digital products are absolutely fantastic. And that would fall under that category, and they've shown tremendous acceleration. But it is a fair thing for them to say, well, you know what, we're going to look at first, how can we enable maybe the transfer of information on drugs, and post-approval for drugs that are on the market, we can approve the use of blockchain in a way to track drugs delivery, and we at least can figure out counterfeiting or other type of those things. And so you're right. I think the gap is definitely filling in. It was very wide a few years ago where it was a wild, wild west and everything was open and we had no idea how to tackle it. Now that we've got in all of those areas, we've got people who have an interest, they know that they're driven towards a solution and they see the value in it. They are collectively working from their own angle, with their own speed, but towards the same destination, which, you know, makes it absolutely fascinating to see evolve. So we should definitely see, first, I think the first pass, you know, is how are we going to be able to collectively, with the right laws, regulations, and yet still the right openness, to add up the data, use the data across the board, create more interoperability and inter-exchange of that data. I think soon after we'll start seeing the ability to make decisions and care recommendations back to the patients and their care teams. But, you know, building on stages is not a bad thing at all.
And how about the recent pandemic, the one that we're currently in? Has that kind of sped things up to make, you know, some decisions about using this technology, and everybody's taking these, you know, appointments from home, and nobody's obviously, you know, social distancing. Has this kind of accelerated the discussion?
Absolutely. And before I answer from a blockchain standpoint, I want to answer from a digital health and telehealth standpoint, as you said, right? It has demonstrated that the fear we had in many ways, for years we said, yeah, it's great, but people are never going to adopt it. And then in all reality, you're facing adopting, you're like, oh, actually it works. So why don't we stick to that model a little bit more? Because it created, you know, it enabled for all of those new care delivery models that were absolutely terrific. Now, yeah, same as the demand grew, then the technology kind of has to follow as well and enable the ability to support the massive amount of patients and care practitioners that actually need to be all wired up. And we've seen a lot of conversations as I played around a health passport, the leverage of blockchain and a way to validate when we might have received our latest tests and the result, but yet also make it so that the patient controls who can get access to those results, so that there's not a unauthorized use and kind of a lack of privacy over it. So the layers that come in with an ability for the patient to control who's going to get access to what information, when and how, is facilitated by a lot of the blockchain protocols as well. So you're right, it has fueled a lot of those movements as well. The health utility network, for example, is a tremendous background or backend for it, and a lot of folks coming together to help figure out how to solve for it. So you absolutely fueled the conversation for sure.
And we've been talking kind of a little bit on the back end, and you touched on it just right now a little bit regarding what's the benefit to us, the patient, of this technology. We've been talking about how, you know, blockchain will help, you know, the providers and governments and all of the stakeholders and players involved. On the flip side, how does it, you know, trickle or affects the patients and all of us, the masses?
Yeah.
Would be some benefits, pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I see three different levels for it. The first one, I'm a strong believer, and it's maybe more me talking than the rest of the industry, but I'm a strong believer that if we find a way to truly open up with the patient control, patient information, so that the myriad of different startups that you talked about, or very dedicated companies that are specialized in specific areas like, you know, cardiovascular diseases or diabetes or others, that they do well, but they do well in silo. They are good with a small health system, but as soon as they try and go national, they face complexity of access to different data points. Whereas if they're able to be directed by a patient to their decentralized set of medical records, then instantaneously those guys get access to a boon of data, and it's absolutely fantastic what they can serve to the rest of the population. So chronic diseases and patients that actually need further support on an ongoing basis could benefit from all of those players that have tremendous, you know, value add. The second part in my mind is the growth of the you know, the measured or the use of the quantified self, rather, you know, we are more and more, I know I'm part of this, at aggregating data about ourselves, and you get to see right away your weight and evolution of your body, and the fact that you're able to get access to more of those data sources across all of your care team and the various areas that gathers data about you, and that you can get access to this from your mobile phone. From a quantified standpoint, it could nudge you in a different behavior and improve you on an ongoing basis. And then I think, you know, the final one, just all in all, is greater coordination of care and early stage detection that providers could do on your behalf. There could be alert systems that could be allowed to continuously look through the chain for your longitudinal representation of your health and identify before, you know, you even feel the symptom, all of the signals that would lead to cardiovascular disease or any kind of other issues that you may as well treat earlier. So that, you know, when you look into it from a patient standpoint, I do believe that the value is tremendous. The last one I would add, I said 3, maybe I go for 4. It maybe, you know, we've been talking about, or I've been focusing on blockchain mainly for health data transfer. What about as a currency as well? So, you know, qualitative, curated health data is of tremendous value and is purchased at a premium on the market by pharmaceutical companies trying to identify patients for a clinical trial, by, you know, various entities that actually do need and want to get access to that data. What if the patient were to benefit from a share of this, right? Instead of having just the back-end players being part of that cash flow, bringing in the patients that are willing to share their own data and the owners of their data into the ecosystem could be a very valuable ecosystem too. So those would be, I think, the 4 key benefits that I could see for, you know, those kind of adoption and openness towards the patient.
No, yeah, just to kind of circle back and recap that, it's very interesting. And we have everybody watching, you know, and trying to understand what blockchain is, how it works. And I already mentioned at the beginning that blockchain touches a variety of components to our life. And right now we're talking about health. And one way that blockchain could potentially help is more direct targeted of patient data, which right now they kind of have to go through a variety of channels and work with third-party providers on some of this data. And the benefit to a patient is allowing and being compensated for offering their data, which can open up. And when I think about this, are you talking about kind of the tests that we see, like not the surveys, but we tested 1,000 people, right? We can probably increase some of those statistics and get better data and results to help target, you know, to cancers and preventative health, right?
Yeah, there's that part. You're exactly. Preventative health is tremendous. The other part is finding the patients that don't know. It's kind of preventative as well, but more so on the stage of clinical trials, for example.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Fair enough. Yeah, exactly.
The terminology, but yeah, when you have clinical trials of X amount of people, we can probably get that. We can probably increase that number, right? If people are aware and incentivized, potentially to offer.
Yeah, and you know, in that field, the problem is not always about it is increasing the number, but what you and I mean by this is increasing the number of relevant patients that are going to match the protocol, that are going to match the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and that are going to have the incentive and the behavior to stick through the clinical trial based on the way the pharmaceutical companies have identified it. And there's a drastic funnel, not always because the pharma companies remove people, but it's because people drop out. There's a lot of attrition, and it is onerous for them to find the right patients that are gonna be statistically relevant, stick with them long enough, and help them do that. And so they're willing to bring in, you know, folks that are gonna help them do that as well. And it could be dually beneficial.
And we're talking about the future here, and we chatted about this previously. You know, some of the barriers we just touched on, regulation, the mindset of even us as patients on, you know, we're accustomed to the way it is now of this model. but it kind of leads me to ask, the way of thinking has to be flipped a little bit. And we're kind of plugging in Web 3.0 right into 2.0, Web 2.0. We're transitioning from the internet to this new wave of technology. So to get your insights and perspective, like I guess the business model would also have to change, right? Like we do certain the way the system does business now between doctors, insurance companies, it's kind of mutually beneficial for these players.
Mm-hmm.
But once we integrate blockchain, it's transparent, immutable, quicker. I think obviously the friction, less friction, which some of the cons to the existing entities and doctors, right? There's a struggle there, and I think that's kind of a barrier too. So can you touch on some of the business models on why there is some hesitation, because now it's going to affect cash flow. Now we're paying patients and all that. So maybe you can talk about that. It's interesting.
I know you're absolutely right, and I do think that collectively providers, payers, and other entities have been inkling to change the model. It's not that they love the way it is. Sometimes it is the way it's been designed for many years, and we're kind of, that's the way we're using the engine. But when you look into it, some of the problems we have is why sometimes some providers want to control the amount of information that goes out is because of the ease of creating lawsuits against them and the misinterpretation of some of the reinterpretation of the decisions on the actions they've taken that led to a specific outcome. And you know what? In the moment, they made the exact right call, and yet someone decides to take them on a suit for 6 to 9 months, that impacts their practice, and then they need to spend more money on. There's that aspect in many ways. It's not because they don't want to, it's because the ecosystem is meant to operate that way. But I think speaking about where things are headed and where a lot of providers and payers are going and bringing in the patients, when you look at models like CareMore or Village MD or others that are far more integrated, centered around the patient and the delivery of care, when you shift the model, the main shift that we constantly talk about is moving from volume to value, moving from because right now I'm a provider, kind of the only way for me to get paid by an insurance, it's not a reimbursement, it's a payment. I need to see as many patients as I can, right? I've got 9 hours a day, I'm gonna blast it, right? And I'm gonna forget who you are. Florian, I saw you 2 days ago, but it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna flip through. Adam, oh yeah, sure, I've seen 5 Adams. Which one are you? Do I even care? I don't know, Whereas here we flip the script and a lot that have been saying, well, we need to slow down, we need to recenter on the patient. And every one of us, the payer, the provider, the specialist, the caregivers, every one of us care for Adam's health improvement, right? And there's a lot of models that have been put together that demonstrate that collective action, lead to improvement on your health. The thing is that your body is not like a car, so it's not like I fix it, and if it starts, it's an improvement. If it doesn't, it's still problematic. Your body heals over time or degrades over time as well. And so as a collective of care providers and financiers and others, you have to be able to demonstrate an over time improvement of that care. But there's plenty of a model that exists. There are plenty of ways to do so. And I think that's where we're moving heavily. A lot of the players in the market are extremely interested. They see a lot of tremendous value. It brings the patient in the center as well. It brings a healthier conversation between everybody. And yet again, right, it will require more transparency, because those models you can only demonstrate improvement if you're able to be transparent, if you're able to share the data, right? And so therefore that brings into play the ability to share that data, to have better control. You bring the patient in the middle, you're able to give them control as to who should their care team be, who are the options that they can get. The transparency means that they could select, you could have 2 doctors, 2 oncologists that are comparable, but one that I feel more comfortable with the other, not because of their competency, just I feel more comfortable. Then I would have an ability with transparency to do price transparency. service transparency, so on and so forth. And then I can select, openly with my eyes wide open, which of the two I want to go with, right? I can start truly assessing my options. Right now, it's a very dark market. If you really want to be able and compare apples to apples, two providers based on their past performance, past behavior, pricing, and other, it's very, very complex. It's still out of luck, or someone who's a doctor, and your best bet is to call the doctor that you trust and say, who are the 3 oncologists you trust in your network? And that more than likely is your best pick of your team right now. And that's kind of where things are shifting. And things are shifting that way already. We see a lot of communities adopting this business model already.
Yeah. And, if I zoom out a little bit, I feel like these concepts, and we know this because we've been in it, but these concepts really apply to the various verticals of oil and gas, healthcare, identity, sovereign states, in the sense of the trust factor, kind of the models that we're trying to integrate this new tech with the old traditional ways, that's going to transform. But I feel everything you're mentioning, as far as even the user benefits, the back-end benefits, we're talking about healthcare right now, but a lot of the concepts and underlying themes here seem to be applied everywhere, which is, some ownership or some control back to the user, the patient, the vendor, the supplier, a little bit of, release of control from the powers that be. So it's kind of interesting. And before we move on, because I kind of want to get out of the healthcare thing and kind of what you're doing next.
Sure.
The last question is, we've talked about blockchain being used interoperable with the various stakeholders in this space. What about internally? Meaning going from, centralization, I guess, to internal private permission chains. I don't even know if there's a need yet because of maybe the systems we have now are secure enough, but we've talked about sharing info amongst everybody. How about internally, right? Like the banks, right? They use it internally. You talk to some other enterprise, they use it internally. You and I are talking about a whole industry kind of playing the part because the information needs to be transferred from patient to patient. But is the space using blockchain technology like in-house?
There's a few in-house usages, but when you step back and look at it, you kind of start looking at them and seeing that it's a use that's a bit more like a database than truly for its true decentralized benefit. And when you really look into those complex enterprise ecosystems, they come in oftentimes with decades of technical debt and operational debt. And is the use of blockchain to really make it more of a Uber database that great when the performances are not necessarily what you're looking for, versus trying to double down on proper modern technologies for centralized systems of information management that then could be integrated in a very decentralized manner with the right interfaces with a vast network of information exchanger, I think is more of that hybrid kind of ecosystem that we're going after, right? Because ultimately, and one thing that I know you and I talked in the past is, not all the data is meant to be stored on the chain. Not all the models and we'll talk a little bit about it, about AI models applied onto the chain. Not all the models that operate on edge are meant to operate with all the data or with everything decentralized. And because there's terabytes and petabytes of data that exist, right? You wouldn't be able to load all the chain. So an on and off chain approach to protocols has to be considered and accounted for. And so a hyper performance system that manages the data still in a centralized fashion, while some data is decentralized and made available to others, is definitely more of where we headed.
Yeah, and you touch on some key points that I share as well. Same views is centralization is good, for certain aspects. Blockchain brings in this decentralized, distributed concept where you're not trusting one another. And I think, until, why would we go from this super, robust central system to a decentralized, slower, cumbersome potentially, right? Like depending on how you're using it. And so I think on the, for the viewers looking, like blockchain isn't really a one size fits all. We know people that are using private permission chains, which is, a select few parties in this consortium, and they're sharing info, not necessarily public. And then we're also talking about public blockchain, permissionless, architecture, which you're sharing. Obviously, it's a computer, it's a global, distributed ledger where everybody can view it. And then you have the middle. And I think right now on the spectrum, there's everybody on the central side using legacy systems. There's this new wave of decentralization on the innovation side, and then most are probably in the middle or more central.
Right.
And my point being is that when we talk about when I have discussions with others around these blockchain and integrating it, it seems like current systems are great, but the innovation and kind of the wave of the future is on the blockchain side. So although companies may not use it, there's no need. At some point, everybody else that's experimenting, running pilots, POCs on the decentralized side are going to find these new ways. And we just talked about it, through specifically healthcare. They're going to find these ways to innovate, whether that's driving down costs, expenses, to increasing revenue. And you mentioned it before, just generating value in other ways that right now we're not accustomed to thinking about where this value is going to come from and where blockchain is going to drive the value. So you touched on some cool things. And now I kind of want to just get into what your current project is. Mm-hmm. If you want to give a backdrop and quick intro on what your company is doing now. And it's in the AI space, and maybe for those that are tuning in, we're talking about blockchain, but blockchain touches AI, touches machine learning, touches IoT. It's an underlying fundamental middleware where this is going to be tied into, autonomous cars, right? It's going to be tied into robots at some point, and that comes back to the trust factor. But give some insight into what you're doing now.
Absolutely. And so our company focuses on an ability to serve enterprise AI and ultimately serve in the space of what we call decision intelligence. And so how can we use a vast amount of data, help find patterns through that data, and then recommend towards specific actions, specific behavior, depending on what we've been able to identify and see from the source of that information, then to a typical kind of type of behavior and maybe kind of adjustments. And so specifically, we do a lot of work mainly in healthcare, but I'm going to say about 70–80% of our clients are healthcare related, mainly payers, providers, and to some degree, pharmaceutical companies. And we also serve retail and financial organizations and others. And so mainly in the theme of healthcare, a lot of what we do is mainly on the administrative side and helping streamline the payments of the transactions between providers and payers, and the ability to more seamlessly and more quickly identify exchange of information that have or carry the signals that could lead to a very specific situation, and without having costly legacy systems having to consume that data and go through long lists of the if then else type of decisions, rather use mathematical equations and regression techniques and classification techniques to say, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 80% sure that this document is going to yield this kind of reaction in your ecosystem. And you should therefore act that way. One example could be, I am 80% sure that the claim you've sent will require a review by the chief medical officer. Make sure to review it. And at the same time, I will send a request to the provider to send us a letter confirming the act. And if I can receive that before the chief medical officer reviews it, even better, I can prepare as a system, I can prepare a package that is pre-organized with the data extracted structured in ways where it is easily consumable and they can make the decision right away because we're telling them this is what we believe you should say, and here's the explanation behind it. But you're still in control because you're ultimately the decision maker, right? So ability to consume data at speed, at scale, to identify signals and organize the recommendation to guide and augment the workforce so that they can make better decisions at a higher accuracy, faster, is really what we enable through our implementations.
And what are some risks associated with AI? Because I know I'm not an expert in AI, whatsoever, but I know it's a constant, you need as much, the more data, the better. So I'm assuming, maybe to go back a little bit, since you are getting so much data, I'm assuming the mathematics behind it is just getting better. Is that accurate?
Right, and that's the hope. So
the algorithms, the mathematics, the inputs, the data inputs, and generating outputs that are consistent to accuracy.
You're absolutely right. So we typically see a dramatic acceleration on the training of the models and their ability to make better decisions. But sometimes too much data could also overload the models, and that's where the expertise of data scientists and their ability to find something that's not what we call overfitted or underfitted, right? So it is a little bit of the art in the science. And then you're right, every time that there is one thing I like to say, every time there's a change, an action is always an opportunity for training, right? There's always an opportunity to refine your model, bring in more intelligence. Every single touch point by an end user, gives intelligence to the system, which, is a continuous beneficial form of engagement and augmentation. Some of the drawbacks, I mean, if you don't measure or if you don't have a continuous oversight of your models, they can go off baseline, and they used in mission critical situations where you start blindly, relying on the system. That could be the GPS that brings you into a lake, right? If you start using an AI system that's helping you doing diagnosis analysis and guiding you on what to do to serve the patient and give them a better, treatment recommendation, well, maybe the system is not black or white. As I said earlier, it is X% confident that it is correct. If you don't every so often oversee or review that confidence level and see how it varies from the baseline, the kind of bias that's been introduced, where it's taking you, you may start acting with a 100% confidence on something that is 60% confident, and therefore you're just off baseline. So the danger is how much do we rely on the system? And in other situations, how much can we accept a system to be flawed? At the end of the day, we keep on saying AI is a representation of humans. Well, if humans are flawed, we need to accept that an AI-based system is going to be flawed in some ways, right? And so that's where I think we're having a healthy debate on ethical AI, transparent and explainable AI, and so on and so forth. So those are going to be great movements as well.
And so what's on the roadmap for? And sorry, what's the name of your company right now?
Sure, ExponentialAI is our company.
And what's next on the roadmap?
So for us, it's we've been heavily investing in the ingestion of information and harmonization of data. Where we moving into the most is all of the abstracted kind of semantic-based analysis, being able to infer knowledge out of complete, unorganized, and structured data. So right now we're able to extract and organize that data, but can we extract meaning? Can we infer meaning? Can we then lead to even further knowledge out of it is where we are pushing the envelope in being able to bring that in an enterprise grade to our clients. You also, we talked about blockchain as well, is how do we expand the data sources that we go after? So blockchain becomes a very natural, connection point for us to then be able to get access to it. And depending on when a patient or provider grants us access to specific data sources, then we would use that to train models and bring that into the ecosystem. And then finally, where we wish to land in some time, not immediate roadmap, but in some time, how do we push that AI to the edge? There's other folks that have already, they flipped it around and they focused on doing edge level AI, which has been absolutely fantastic. it's really interesting to see how with just small data, targeted data set that train their models on the spot, how they are able to guide, you know, the end users right in their pockets and in their watches, and you know, help them navigate their day to day. So the edge level intelligence is absolutely a space as well where we want to target and grow.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think, you know, for quite some time now, with all these devices and so much more data being out there, you know, AI makes sense to kind of streamline this process. But not only that, you know, accuracy, analytics, data scientists, and gathering this information, which, you know, in turn, you know, benefits us in one way or another. And as you mentioned, it's kind of interesting, right? Humans are flawed, so therefore, like, the AI, you know, models are going to have some issues, and I kind of never really. You think AI is going to solve that, but that you know, you're garbage in, garbage out. So like whatever you get is, you know, is what you have, and you need to understand that.
Yeah.
No, that's great, and so I know we got a couple minutes here. Last couple of things, you know, just first of all, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Insights and knowledge. I have a couple things outside of this, just some cool questions like, what else are you following? A couple questions. I want to know kind of what you're following now, whether it's an AI, other kind of technology. I know you write, right? You're a contributor. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on too is because you do contribute to publication. Which one is it?
I'm one of the contributors on Forbes on the Technology Council, and try and cross-pollinate left and right where I can, for sure.
And cool. And so a couple things I want to touch on your perspective overall. You know, it could be blockchain related, it could be AI related, but you contribute it and you're on the council. So I'm sure you see a lot of things. You know, one thing, first question is, anything surprising you, anything that sparked your interest or that sparks your interest right now, that you're kind of following, or something that maybe all of us don't know about? Or maybe know about and they're executing. Like, I don't know.
And it is in the AI space, and I think everybody's rallying behind it. It's the opening of OpenAI, GPT-3, for example, right? And the natural language generation that is pretty much freaking me out at that stage. The deep fakes, the ability to, you know, when you have the ability to generate a text that actually makes sense, the ability to generate a video with someone that actually you think you could have met in person, and bring all of that together and have something that's absolutely believable. I find that absolutely fascinating. I think there's a lot of dystopian and utopian perspective we can bring from there. And I've been, you know, looking into it. We've been trying to play around as well, toy around a little bit with the AI behind it, and it's that's been captivating me for sure.
Yeah, that's crazy. The deep fakes, you know, I kind of really didn't know about that. You know, just as of, you know, recent past.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is interesting stuff. You know, it's kind of scary about what you can do and the things you can create out of that. We'll see.
Well, absolutely. The fear is, I mean, there's plenty of fears. But what do we believe in, and how do we believe in certainty, and how do we bring back something that helps us say, no, this was completely generated by an AI. This is effectively Adam, you know. Maybe soon neither of us will have to be there. We can just prepare the scripts, you know, give a seed that expands, creates a full-blown 2 hours conversation, and then we've got our avatars looking just like us and go at it while we go get a drink.
For sure. So I know we're coming up on time. Your last question. We have obviously a lot of students, you know, partnered up with universities, and there's a global audience out there. Some developers, some entrepreneurs, some non-technical, you know, business kind of minded. Any books you can potentially suggest on, you know, some people reading? I know you mentioned a couple to me on our call, but, you know, not to put you on the spot, but you might have a couple.
You're putting me on the spot, but you know what? Speaking about AI, and that's interestingly, that's a book that I was talking about with my team. I'm going to do that live. So that's the French version of it, but the Society of Mind by Minsky. Back from the early 80s, the guys from MIT that created the really the AI subject matter, right? And wrote this book, and there's a lot. It's theoretical in nature, but it helps you think very differently about the way to build systems, ecosystems, environments. And it doesn't just have to be about AI. When you read it and you step back and consider how it could apply to, it could apply for architecture. It could apply for many different ways on how to conduct business as well in many ways. I've found in this book over the years, many different types of inspiration. And I was literally just a few days ago sharing a few quotes from it with my team that was trying to crack a problem, and like, read those chapters and those are going to help you, right? So that would be the book I would recommend to the team right there and there. So I'm open. Send me emails. Tell me what you think. Notes and whatever. I would love to hear what you guys think about this book once you digest it.
Awesome, appreciate that. And I think you had another suggestion in the past was the Cathedral and the Bazaar. Is that what it's
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know what? I've got it somewhere here too, just so that no, I don't have it next to me. But it's right there. There you go. See, right there.
Perfect.
So that I'm not just pretending to you. So
Yeah,
this one is another fantastic perspective on open source systems and the battle between locked in ecosystems, open source systems. And a lot of what the reference you made, Adam, is like, where do we go between, completely centralized, decentralized? Well, there's always a battle between the extremes. And this book addresses a lot from Eric Remen, addresses a lot of that mindset. Is like, nothing is perfect, but there's benefits, learn the pros and cons. And for me, this one was another great influencer as well. Thank you for bringing this one up. Yeah.
Perfect. I downloaded it not so long ago. Where can people find you?
LinkedIn is a great source. Go for it. You'll find me there. Add me there, and I'm usually pretty active. I would say that's pretty much the place for me.
Awesome. Well, all of you that have been spending time with us, appreciate you listening in to Florian and my discussion. If you want to catch all the full interviews, please visit ri2020.io. You can also visit our YouTube channel at Reimagine 2020. And you can catch full panels, full interviews. Again, Florian, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thank you very much for having me. That was a great conversation. I love it.
And we hope to have you back. We will be hosting a series of events and conferences every month while everybody's kind of sheltering in place and schools are working, studying from home. We plan to bring you the best content as much as possible with industry leaders. And various individuals that are working across, various technologies from AI to ML to blockchain, IoT. So again, Florian, thank you for joining us. We hope to have you back, and we'll see you soon.